Hello and welcome to the Superworm Show, where we will teach you tricks and facts about raising superworms. Today we have colony number 2 here, still waiting to get a name. All of the superworms were just fed nice potatoes. Fun fact about feeding your wormies potatoes: it's easiest for worms to eat potatoes when they're nice, soft, and moist. So, when picking out potatoes to feed your worms, don't go for fresher, go for older, and the worms will be happier. Let's talk about what's been going on. I've been gone for about 2 weeks and the worms were kind of hungry. I noticed a lot climbing around, a lot scavenging, even 2 sneaky boys trying to escape. Also, I noticed some of my potatoes over here rotted, but I'm going to cover that up just in case you don't like that. Now, nothing is really broke, but when I did lift up this thing fell out. So I'm going to have to fix that, but not now because there's a lot of worms over there. Anyways, we have 2 problems we are facing right now. I'm going to start with the biggest problem. The biggest problem right now is that we have this fine worm. Now, the thing about this worm is that I was showing my dad this worm, and he thought that I was being annoying, so he smacked my hand, smacking the wormy, and it fell off a chair into the ground. This was on the last day of me being at my dad's house, and I was very sad, in tears, trying to make sure he was okay. He was curling up a little bit and kind of confused and hurt, but as you can see, now he's doing great. To see if he was okay, I brought him with me in the original superworm container from my dad's house to my mom's house, and looked after him for a couple of days, feeding him bananas and other things I could find. Now, I think that he may be ready to join the others, even though he still is a little gimpy. So, why I'm bringing this up is because earlier when I said setting up your worm area, if you have extra room and extra space and time, you can make a tiny hospital area. This will be convenient for when your worms get sick or hurt and you need a place to put them. What if you didn't have this superworm container and you didn't have any of these and the only place you had was the main thing? You don't want to go pull out a bowl to put your worm in, and plus that would be kind of painful for the worm because the bowls are quite slippery. And what if you had a worm that was curling up and slowly dying? Wouldn't you want to have a special room to put it on? That's what I thought. That's when the hospital comes in handy. So, as we can see, that's where I put this guy, until I realized we had to go. Now, I was kind of nervous about taking him all the way with me in the car, because worms have to be kept at a certain temperature so they don't die. But what I've learned is that you can kind of push your limits with the temperature thing. I kept my worm in this container because it has a lid, and honestly, it's quite handy. And I took him with me. I kept him in my backpack pouch. And since it was very, very hot in the summer then, not as cool it is now, I had to bring him anywhere because leaving him in the car would cause very hot temperatures. And even though I'd probably be fine because this is kind of like insulated, I decided not to risk it and to take my wormy in with me. So if you ever want to take your worm, or like any other pet if you ever want to take your worm or worms with you, you can go ahead and put them in a container like this. If you don't have a container like this, what could also work is any type of small container that has holes in it. If you took an empty plastic water bottle and poked some holes in it and put some oatmeal in it, that would work perfectly, except it's kind of flimsy, so you have to be careful. If you have one of these type of containers and you got permission to poke holes in it, you can do so with a pencil, drill, or even one of these. This would probably be the best because since this container is so small, it's likely to fall over and the oats are to lead if you use a drill. Anyways, if you don't have food for your worm, don't worry, worm's gonna be fine unless the worm is in dire condition. I tried to offer this little guy here some bananas, but he decided not to eat them. So I just left them there and let him eat them. Also, I tried to feed him grapes, but he wasn't really interested at all, and they kind of just ended up rotting. Worms love, love, love potatoes. Definitely worms' favorites are potatoes, but they do like bananas as well, especially beetles. So, we are getting ready to part. I'm just going to talk about worm injury before we get started. Here's the worm. If you look closer, you can see a dark spot on his head. I think this is because of the injury, but some of them also have this, so I'm not sure. Now now as you can see, he had a darker spot. Let's look at one of our other worms and see what they look like on their head. As you can see, this guy only has a little bit of darkness, and this guy also only has a little bit of darkness. They're all very hungry, by the way. This guy right here has a little bit more darkness than others. So I don't know if it's just because of his natural shade of his exoskeleton, or if it's due to the injury. With this smack, it could have caused the blood to swell up there. But it has been 2 weeks, and nothing has really changed about the color. So I believe that it's just the color of his exoskeleton. Also, just to make sure you guys know, if you want to check how healthy his worm is, just put it on your hand. You can see this one's kind of slow to react to things, kind of bad for worms, and is using kind of weird methods to move around. But after being with him for a week, I'm just going to run a few tests. You can also use these tests on your worms if you want to see as well. So I'm just going to touch his behind and give it a tiny little squeeze and see how fast he can get away. He is small, so I'm going to give it to that, but he is trying to look for a place to hide. If your worm doesn't exhibit enough trying to run away or hiding, they're probably not best to put back in and be separated, because slow worms might get eaten. He's trying to burrow. If your worm is sitting, not moving, and only slightly moving, it's best to keep them off to the side or in a different container. Also, if you put your worm on your hand, you can see this one's kind of slow, but again, he's really trying. Right now, I have 2 options of what I can decide to do with him. I can either put him in here and pray that he'll be okay, or I can put him with a few other of his friends in my glass wormy fish bowl and keep him in there. Before we get moved on to other segments, I just want to show you guys some of my photos I took with him when me and him were bonding at my mom's house. Have fun. Now that you're back, I think I'm going to decide to keep him with a few, 1, 2 to 3 other worms in a tiny glass container before putting him with all the other worms where he could potentially be cannibalized, and worse, just because he's kind of slow. We're going to move on to the second problem, if you remember me talking about that. So it's been 2 weeks, so I was getting the potatoes for all the worms to munch on. As you can see, they're very grateful, and there's a lot in there, when I noticed one guy sitting over here, just doing nothing. Now, I don't know what told me this, but something looked really, really off about the whole situation. So I picked up the worm, and I realized something was wrong. This is my worm here, and as you can see, he is slowly but surely making his way through the gates of death. As you can see, he can kind of roll around and move his arms, but he doesn't really have a lot going on, and he's turning very, very flat, not squishy like a worm should be. Over the 2 years I've been doing worm care, I can tell this is very bad. This is very bad, and definitely not good for a worm. As you can see, he's really, really trying, but by the looks of it, unless a miracle happens, the Grim Reaper is coming for him. Now, I also want to mention this. This is one having a house, and or a hospital also comes in handy, because with worms like this, are we literally going to leave them in there, or are we going to let them die in peace? This guy is a little speedy, and luckily I have this beautiful little tree stump right here for him to lay on, so that's where I've been putting him. And I also gave him a potato or other worms that make it up here, and I'm hoping that he'll eat it. and maybe get better than he is, but I really, really doubt that. By tomorrow, if he's still up here, I think I'm going to create him a beautiful little place to spend the rest of his days. I might pick some flower petals and put it in there, and I'll probably have lots of food and oatmeal around him. Worm death is really sad, but what's worse is not knowing where to put your worm. So since I didn't really mention this before, I'm going to talk about it. When worms die, or beetles, you have a couple of things you could do. Number one is to just leave your worm in the trash. This is kind of brutal in my opinion, so I usually don't go with this method unless my dad cleans out my cage and he throws them away, and it makes me really sad when I find that out. But yeah, some of us, we don't have the option to bury our worms. The second option is to bury a worm. Now you can either just, what I usually like to do is I just take the worm and put him in the dirt. And I just put him in the dirt and I put a little rock where I buried him so I know that he's there. Now, worms die a lot. I do not know how or why. I have not dealt with this problem as much as I have. But as much as I probably should have. I should know a lot of more ways. But it's really hard to decide whether you want to throw a worm or bury it because you feel like, oh my gosh, there's so many dead bodies in our backyard. But after a while, the worm will decompose, or at least fairly turn into dirt. The third option is basically burying, but you can make a tiny little coffin out of a paper towel. Now, when I say this, you may be like, what? What I mean is wrapping the worm in a paper towel and burying it that way, but only a tiny chunk of a paper towel. If you are going to do this, I do not suggest use plastic because that doesn't biodegrade and is probably bad to bury. Although nothing will probably happen, it's kind of weird to think about when everything's decomposed, there's just still the shape there. So yeah. Moving on, over the time I spent with this guy here, I learned a little bit more about these wormies. For these worms, sometimes they need water. Before I knew more about worms, I took cotton balls and filled them with water for the worms to drink out of. Now, this works, but guess what? Worms are meant to eat, not really drink. So, and I would often find burrows dug in the cotton balls, and that was kind of gross, and they got moldy and stuff. Now, potatoes, they're really hard to burrow through unless you put a whole potato in there, but that's kind of weird. And sponges, it's the same thing. They'll always burrow in them, and you'll have to check the moldy sponges while you're rinsing them. And that's quite gross. What I was finding out while watching videos about superworms, very few limited, poorly edited videos, but thank you to those superworm creators, for creating those videos, because I have found out that these things called water gels, basically edible silica gels that are non-toxic for worms to drink out of, exist. It's basically like edible water, basically Jello. But it's made for more cockroaches, but you can also use them for superworms. Now, I was thinking about getting these, and honestly, I think it will be a great addition, but I don't know when or if I'm even going to get them. If I do, I will let you guys know. As you can see, this worm is kind of trying really hard to eat. I'm so happy he's trying. As you can see at the mouth, that worm is trying to eat and nipping and is aware that is food, but is probably having a really hard time. Now, right now, I do not have bananas at home, but if I did, I would definitely switch this out for a banana. And also, I could help him right now, but I'm not going to because the worm will probably get frightened, and he's doing really good right now. Now, since this worm is eating, maybe he'll be better, and maybe he will not die. Because I think this death either happened because another worm sucked his guts out and tried to eat him or bit off a limb, or it's just because he's starved. And he's quite a small one, so the starving option makes more sense. So right now we cannot do the stump check to see who and what is in the stump, but I'm going to try a little bit to do it without moving the stump, because I do not want to bother that worm that's trying really hard. that was really hard to get footage of. But as you can see, the worms... Okay, so our friend fell. Right here. I know. We're gonna name him Phil because Phil just fell. Poor guy. Oh, come on. Okay, there we go. So yeah, we just saw that. As you can see, worms were eating the potato that's underneath. And great that we were able to see that. Now let's get this tank set up for these guys. For this guy and a few of the fellow bystanding worms to join. Okay, so I checked and I accidentally forgot my wormfish bowl. So we're going to use this thing, which is totally fine, especially for free worms. This guy is still kind of sniffing around being a weirdo. Okay guys, I've just gone for my worms, and this is one of those times where I may have changed my mind. I think that it may be time for me to go back into with everyone. Why I'm saying this is because if I put him here with another one, he's even at more risk to being cannibalized. And I think that he'll do fine. Okay, his little leg is a bit. But it's still very emotional because I'll never know if I'll find him again. So my wormy, remember me, and we will forever be together, my darling. And I hope it will help you facing your worries or just entertain you. Thanks for watching. Hope you always take care. And goodbye to our wormy nicknamed Olivia.